trying one final attempt as far as getting the map quiz information relayed from me to you. So I tried this in class, but the Kaltura didn't pick it up, so I'm doing it all over again in another classroom. It's using a microphone that's quite far from me, so if the audio is bad, I apologize. I'll try to fix it in post-production. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the various map identification locations that are mentioned there in Exam 1 information. Now I'm going to go a little bit out of order. I'm going to start off with the lines of latitude, which are there in the middle. Then I'll come back and I'll do the mountains, and then I'll finish off talking about the world regions that we'll use in this class. So that's the big idea here, is we're using this particular information that you're doing on the map identification portion of the exam, because you're going to come across it throughout the rest of the semester. Further, I have a teaching philosophy that students, if they can draw something, then they can understand it. They know it best. And so if you can draw the identification of these regions, these lines, these mountains, the proper locations, then it'll help you as far as understanding where various phenomenon is. So our first line of latitude is nice and neat because it's right there on the paper for us. And so that's this line right in the middle called the equator. And so for the map identification portion of Exam 1, all you would have to do if this question is asked, keep in mind I'm only going to ask for 10 of those 25 places, lines, regions, whatever. I'm only going to ask for 10 of them. So go back to the sample Exam 1 quiz, or sorry, sample Exam 1 document to see kind of the sample as far as what you would expect on the map identification portion. So this is 0 degrees or the equator. You also see, although faint in this particular illustration, this map that's being used is down here the dashed line, and that is the Tropic of Capricorn, which is 23.5 degrees south. So keep in mind that's not east, that's equator, is what I'm going to put the E for. So that's also known as the Tropic of Capricorn up here, starting over where Hawaii is, coming through this dashed line. It's already on the map for you, that's why I'm not spending too much time trying to identify the places it goes over because it's already there for us. It is 23.5 degrees north, or the Tropic of Cancer. Next up, we've got the South Pole, which is down here. This is essentially this line at the bottom, and that's 90 degrees south. And the North Pole up here, and that is 90 degrees north. And once again, I'm trying to trace that line. That line is 90 degrees north because you can't go any higher than that. Now we have to put some more in between here. So these are going to use different features on the map to help us identify them. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be drawing parallel lines. So all of these lines, if you notice, they're all straight lines and they're all parallel to each other. So now we've got to find our kind of our key identifiers. So for the 30 degrees north line, one thing to kind of think about is this little water body right here. This is called the Persian Gulf. I don't know how well that can be seen there. So this little water body is the Persian Gulf. The northern tip of it would be, put a dot. Or you could kind of just do the southern coast of the United States or the northern part of the Gulf of Mexico. Just kind of put a dot or a line there. And from there, we'll just kind of connect the lines. Once again, we're making a straight line. And so 30 degrees north is roughly there. And I can bring a ruler to the exam one day if you want me to. 30 degrees north. And so then 30 degrees south is going to be similarly on the other side. And so the same kind of distance. It's one way to think about it. And so down here in South Africa, there's this country inside of a country. And so that's that dot, put a dot there. Or you can have what we call the bight of Australia, the top part of that, put a dot. Or just above this little inlet, just kind of go just a little bit above it, and put a dot just right above that little inlet here, South America, and another place mark it. Any of these can be used to then make our straight line across, showing 30 degrees south latitude. So 30 degrees north and south. So essentially what you'll come across is in between the tropics, Tropic of Capricorn and Cancer, is what we'll call tropical areas. This area in between are the subtropics. Notice that they're really not a big area, but kind of narrow, so that's the subtropics, roughly. Now we've got to draw the mid-latitudes. So that requires us to draw the 60 degrees north and 60 degrees south line. First off, 60 degrees north, let's go to the southern tip of this landmass called Greenland. and straight line across. So you'll kind of come across the southern part of Alaska, you'll kind of come across just the northern tip of the United Kingdom, and keeping a straight line going all the way across, and that is 60 degrees north. And then 60 degrees south, just see where this part of Antarctica, just above it, and then go straight line across. Notice there's nothing else other than just a little bit of that peninsula is the 60 degrees south. And so now we have the mid-latitudes. There's a term you'll come across, the mid-lats. And that's those particular areas there. Next up, I'm going to go ahead and go over the mountainous areas. So the mountainous areas. First off, we've got the Rockies. So the Rockies, they're not along the coast down here in the United States, but they're kind of generally run parallel to it. So if we were drawing the Rockies for this particular map identification portion, something like so. Now, the Appalachian Mountains are also going to go parallel to a coastline somewhat. They begin down here, just a little bit north of Atlanta, and go all the way up into Canada. So this isn't perfect, but this is roughly where the Appalachian Mountains are. Next up, the Andes Mountains just now go right along the edge of the western part of South America. And you'll find the Andes Mountains. Next up are the Atlas Mountains. The Atlas Mountains are just essentially the northwestern edge of Africa. That's not perfectly precise, but it's good enough because we're going to come back to the idea that these two areas are actually bumping up against each other way back when and created those particular physical features. Next up, if we go to the northern part of Italy, so Italy is this boot-shaped country, and we kind of somewhere in here draw an upside down smiley face or a frown, and that are the Alps, which are very important, and we'll come back to them, of course, in Europe. Next up are the Himalayan mountains. The Himalayan mountains are really useful for separating South Asia from East Asia, but if we just all the way through these particular area here, we've got two big countries, the country of India and the country of China. And so in between them, kind of like so, is the Himalayas. And the last one for the map identification portion are the Urals, which we see this real tiny, what's called a sea or a lake, an inland sea. Just a little bit north of it is where the mountain range really starts. And this pretty much just goes straight up, and that is the Urals. Now we're going to come across this idea that the Russia, where do we put it? Do we put it with Central Asia? Do we put it with Europe? Do we even put it with East Asia? It's such a big country as far as its land area. We're going to put it with Central Asia this semester. But if we really think about Russia in particular, this part on this side of the Ural Mountains is very much European, where here it's a little bit more Central Asian, a little bit more like these countries down here in Central Asia. So it's where it's a little bit more complicated. These lines aren't perfect. Now let's go through the world regions, beginning with what we're going to call Northern America. So we're going to come across maybe some new to you terms as far as these regions. And so we maybe have always heard of North America. For the purpose of this course, because there's so much more characteristics that Mexico has with other countries in what we're going to call Central America, Northern America is different than maybe what we'll think of as North America. North America is often Canada, United States, and Mexico. But for Northern America in this particular course, we're just going to think of it as United States, Canada, and I guess to a certain extent Greenland and so on. All right, as far as drawing the boundaries of Northern America, I suggest beginning over here at the southern tip of Florida. So we go from the southern tip of Florida to the southern tip of Texas, and then if you can see, there's a boundary between Mexico and the United States. Just essentially trace that boundary. And then you'll continue all the way around and make sure you get Alaska. So just go ahead and trace all the way over here. And now we get to this situation here where we have the country of Greenland and the country of Iceland. We're going to go in between them. Iceland's a part of Europe, and Greenland is what we're going to call Northern America. Now you're going to get through here, and you see that dot right there. That dot is Bermuda. Marine is probably more characteristic maybe of what we're going to find on a term called Oceania, but it does belong to the British, so it could be part of Europe, but we're essentially going to scoot around it and go back down to our southern tip of Florida. Keep in mind there's these little dots out here. These are called the Bahamas, and they're part of the Caribbean. They're not part of Northern America. So all of this here then would be part of what we're going to call Northern America. Next up is Central America. And key distinguishing Central America from the Caribbean, which is the other area of what we're going to call Middle America, is this particular land area. So this is called an isthmus. So this particular area, all this land area here that goes from Northern America to South America, we're going to call Central America. Meanwhile, all of these islands we'll call part of the Caribbean. These go all the way around to the northern part of South America. So we have two different areas of Middle America. We have the Central America part, which includes Mexico, and in the Caribbean part, which are these islands here in Middle America. So Middle America, once again, Central America and the Caribbean, and it's going to be south of Northern America. Next up is, since it's sitting there right there, let's go ahead and do it. Let's go ahead and do South America, since we're already over here. Now, we'll get to this later, but there's this little island or some islands out there that we'll come across that we'll be looking at. So let's go ahead and pick them up. And then we're going to come down around, and we have these options here as far as all this. So let's just go ahead and go around the southern tip and only include this one group of islands called the Falkland Islands. And we're going to go around, and then when we get back up here, we'll just kind of trace once again that northern boundary or that northern land area of South America. So then this is South America. Pretty straightforward. All right, so we've got most of the Western Hemisphere taken care of. Let's now do Sub-Saharan Africa. Now, for the purposes of this exam, for the map identification portion of Sub-Saharan Africa, all that you would need to do is draw roughly a dashed line or a solid line, whatever you choose, right about there. Now, if we're being perfectly precise and we follow exactly what the course says as far as our regions of the world, when we're lumping in, when we're aggregating these countries into bigger groupings, when we're looking at data, looking at Sub-Saharan Africa, it's actually going to include all of the countries south of this line that I'm drawing right through here. So what we're going to call Sub-Saharan Africa is all that south of that particular line there, which just follows those particular countries. However, for the exam, once again, if you roughly have a line right about there delineating or separating Sub-Saharan Africa from Northern Africa, that's all good. So as far as the rest of this, let's just go ahead and follow roughly the shape of the continent, the subcontinent here, the southern part of Africa. And so we've got these little islands here. Let's go ahead and include them, and include the big island of Madagascar. We're going to get up here. You see that island out there? We're going to just miss it. Just miss that island right there. That belongs to Southwest Asia. From here, we'll just follow the coastline up until we get back to where we first started drawing our lines. So all this here, I'm going to go ahead and I'll put this in a particular highlighter color. All this here is part of Sub-Saharan Africa, which distinguishes itself from Northern Africa. However, once again, if you put that straight line right through there, that's good enough for Sub-Saharan Africa for the exam. While we're up here, let's go ahead and do Northern Africa. So Northern Africa, we're just going to once again follow the coastline, follow the land area. In this case, we're going to go all the way around until we get this part of Egypt, and then we're going to go down through this particular narrow, thin sea or water body, and we link back up to where we were beforehand. And so then all of this is considered Northern Africa. Next up is Southwest Asia, which we're going to include Southwest Asia with Northern Africa because there's a lot more language and other cultural characteristics that kind of unite them or make them more similar than the rest of Africa. All right, so we'll go ahead and we'll pick up this island around here. So that island belongs to this country of Yemen. And we're going to go around, and so there's this important country that we need to note, and that's the country of Iran. So from here, we're going to kind of use countries and also these water bodies to help us. So I'm going to go ahead and I'll go ahead and put the water bodies. There's two of them. I'm going to go ahead and color them in orange so they really stand out, so you really see these water bodies. And then from there, we're going to draw our lines. All right, so the extreme eastern border of the country of Iran, kind of follow that all the way up to this first water body. And then from here, just pretty much in between the water bodies, just in between them, connect them. It's definitely a transition area. These boundaries aren't perfect. It doesn't like say, well, everyone on this line's, certain characters, everyone. No, they're definitely transition areas, but as a whole, when we start grouping them, this is the best we can do. This country here is called Turkey. We're going to include Turkey. And then from here, we'll go just straight down the coastline. And so then this particular area here, I'm going to shade it in using my pencil. This here all represents what is historically known as the Middle East, which we're going to call Southwest Asia. You'll also see in some groupings of it being referred to as Western Asia. All right, since we're looking at certain countries over here, let's go ahead and do South Asia. All right, so South Asia, before I go to the other ones in the northern part of Asia, including Central Asia, let's go ahead and identify certain countries. And so this big country here is India. This big country here is China. Huge country up here is Russia. All right, now in particular, we've got this country called Pakistan, which is right there. And then over here, we've got this country called Burma or Myanmar, which is right there. Now, Burma and Myanmar, we do not include with South Asia, so we're going to go ahead and kind of use that as a separator. And then China is not part of South Asia, so we're going to use the Chinese boundary right through here to separate South Asia from East Asia. And then the country of Pakistan we are going to include. So we are not going to include Afghanistan with South Asia, but we are going to include Pakistan. So then Pakistan, right. So from here, you want to pick up these islands there, and you want to definitely make sure you pick up that big island called Sri Lanka there. So this here is South Asia. Kind of small in terms of it doesn't represent a lot of countries. It's Pakistan, India, Sri Lanka, the Maldives, which are these islands there. Nepal, a country kind of hard to see up there, and also a country called Bhutan. So just a few countries there in South Asia. Now, we're going to include Russia with the rest of Central Asia. So Central Asia is traditionally thought of as just this core area right through here, including Afghanistan, Kazakhstan, usually Mongolia, not always, sometimes Mongolia. We're going to include it. So Mongolia, Kazakhstan, Afghanistan, kind of these key countries to think about when we're drawing these lines, but also Russia. So we're going to include Russia with Central Asia, so let's go ahead and draw it now. First off, let's go this way. Let's go towards the right, towards the east. And so we're going to use the Chinese boundary to help separate, once again, two Asian regions. In this case, we've got East Asia to the south of this line, and Central Asia to the north. So could we call it North Central Asia? Perhaps. Important, we got this peninsula that sticks out. We don't want to include that with Central Asia. That's part of East Asia. And we've got these islands here. These are the Japanese islands. We do not want to include those. So right at the top, this part is actually part of Russia. Continuing on, it's kind of complicated with these islands there. All right, from here, we've got these islands there. We want to go right in between that grouping. And so what we have over here is more North America. That's Alaska. That's essentially the continuation over there. So North America actually continues on this particular map, on this particular area of the Pacific. We're going to continue on, go all the way around. Might as well just go up here. We get to these islands up there, come through them. This is part of Norway, this is part of Russia. Now from here, the rest of it's just pretty much already been done for us. We just have to use the eastern boundary of Russia to then separate. And so now, all of this here is what we're going to call Central Asia. So it's going to include Mongolia, it's going to include Russia, and all these various, what we call the stands. A lot of these countries end in the word stand, this, of course, including Russia. All right, since we're already over here, let's go ahead and do East Asia. And so we're going to continue the Chinese border, Chinese boundary. And so now we're going to include, it's kind of complicated, but we're going to include Taiwan. We're not going to include the Philippines. So we're not going to include these. And just come up, and from here, just make sure you get all of Japan. So Japan, Taiwan, China, and the Koreas are part of East Asia, which I'll go ahead and do that now, so we can kind of help see this particular area. Next up is Southeast Asia, and so now Southeast Asia, we are going to include the Philippines, so that's kind of our key thing. These islands, try to miss most of them, but islands are, so much of them are very, very small populations, and for the purposes of this map exercise and what we're trying to do here, it's okay if you miss a few. Key to this, though, I will deduct points, or I will get out the evil grading pen if I don't see Southeast Asia as far as being separated on this particular island. This is the island of New Guinea, in which on one side of it, it's part of Southeast Asia, and on the other side, it's part of Oceania. So we'll continue around, we'll go all the way up, and so now we just did Southeast Asia. So Southeast Asia includes this mainland portion, just south of China, but also all these islands, including the Philippines, including the Indonesia, parts of Malaysia, and this western part of the island of New Guinea. All is a part of Southeast Asia. And of course, that would also include Burma. We talked about Burma beforehand when we were trying to separate it from South Asia. Next up is Oceania. So Oceania is going to include two big countries, Australia and New Zealand. So we have the big island, or the big continent of Australia, and the two smaller islands of New Zealand. It's also going to include all these various islands, and I get that there's, different countries might have possession of these different islands. For example, Hawaii, and it's obviously part of the United States, which is we've been talking about as part of Northern America. But a lot of its characteristics are what we're going to find is very similar to other countries in Oceania. So Oceania is just going to be this kind of catch-all area. It's going to include Australia, New Zealand, and just everything else. Of course, once again, making sure we include the eastern part of the island of New Guinea. And then from here, kind of going all the way around, all this would be representing Oceania. Part 1. What do you mean part 1? Because in part 2, Oceania is also over here. Such a wide and vast area. It includes Melanesia, Micronesia, and Polynesia, as we'll find out. So all this there represents Oceania. Now, for the map quiz, for the map identification portion of the exam, I will not have you distinguish Western Europe from Eastern Europe. I might ask you to just distinguish Europe as a whole. Because it is so small here in this particular map, trust me, I can use Europe later, a map of Europe, blow it up, make it much bigger, and then we can separate Western from Eastern then. But for this, just can continue over here, kind of connect the lines. So all that remains, and so make sure we get over here. We want to include Greece, all the Mediterranean, continue this over here. Once again, we could go over here and pick up Bermuda if we so choose. Don't have to. Just come back up here. Make sure Iceland is included, and make sure you also include the islands here above Norway, above Scandinavia. So all of this then is what we're going to call Europe.